Hey, everybody. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And it's Friday, June 5th. It's been a minute since I've been on. I've got my four small kids and had them all week. It's been very busy with them, but I've missed you all very much. I'm so glad to be back. And we've got a lot of great interviews coming. I've got several days next week where I've got two and even three interviews back to back. Tuesday, I'll be with literally three interviews in a row. So it'll be crazy, but some great, great people, truly amazing people, and look forward so much to having everybody on next week. I know you cannot watch all the interviews, but please feel free to watch the replays when you can. Also, just want to mention, if anybody is interested in doing your own interview, please feel free to reach out to me. The best way is on Facebook. My handle is Harmonic Tim, and I would love to touch base and see if it's the right time for you to think about sharing your story with the world. And if anyone's interested in one-on-one peer support, reach out to me as well there. And also, if anyone's able to support the channel, all the ways to do so beneath this video. With that being said, I'm going to bring in our guest today. Today, we're speaking with Dr. Katie Suleta. Dr. Katie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, it's so good to see you. I appreciate this very much. And I'm going to start with a quick bio, and then I'll ask you in a minute to share anything I missed, but also any kind of fun things like hobbies. So I've been thinking about that. But Dr. Suleta, and by the way, her name is spelled as if it does not have an H, but it's said with an H, right?
Yes.
Dr. Suleta lives in Colorado. She's a public health expert, educator, data strategist, and a dedicated science communicator. She has served as non-clinical faculty within residency and fellowship programs. She focuses her expertise on instructing and mentoring physicians in training in research methodology, study design, and data analysis. Her research spans critical areas of public health, including HIV, hepatitis C, and educational outcomes. She also writes extensively on health literacy and critical thinking, focusing a skeptical lens on the wellness industry, on regulated health professions, and the proliferation of predatory health claims. She holds a doctorate in health sciences from George Washington University, a master of public health from DePaul University, a master of science in health informatics from Boston University. Her website is beneath this video. It's drkatiesuleta.com. She also is on Instagram and some other platforms, but if you go to her website, you can see it all there. She's also going to be speaking next weekend at CSICon, which is the conference of the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, which is being held in Buffalo, New York, from June 11th to the 14th. The website for that is also beneath this video if you want to check it out. And with that being said, Dr. Katie, if you could please tell us more about yourself and some hobbies, and then we'll get started.
Yeah, thanks so much for the plugs. Let's see. I like you said, I live in Colorado. I'm very much a Colorado kind of kid, so I do a lot of stuff outdoors. I'm one of those really annoying Colorado people that's always outside whenever I can be. I do a lot of writing for various outlets. So MedPage Today, for example, I do a lot of stuff for them. I'm also a regular contributor for the American Council on Science and Health, and have kind of had a sprinkling of work published in other places, but all of that's also at my website.
Well, that's awesome. What's your favorite thing to do outdoors?
Oh, great question. Probably skiing, although I kind of split my year between skiing and rock climbing. So it just depends on the snow that year and also, the weather outside. We had a terrible winter this year, though. I think pretty famously, a lot of people heard that Colorado basically had no snow this year. So I spent a lot of time rock climbing this winter, unfortunately.
That's awesome. Very, very cool. Well, I'm so glad you're here. This is going to be a little bit of a different interview. Usually when I interview people, it's basically pretty much this is a one-track interviews channel. We talk about what you used to believe as a Christian and why you decided that that's not the correct worldview. We're going to talk a little bit about that, but then we're going to talk a little bit more about skepticism as well. So I'm kind of glad to have you here. It's a different kind of interview. You're kind of breaking up the monotony, and I appreciate that very much. And I've got some questions because I've got an interesting story myself that relates to some of the things that you deal with. But if you could, before we get into your current work, could you just tell us what was your life growing up like in terms of religion? What did you get taught as a kid about the Bible or Jesus, and how did that change over the years?
Sure. I grew up in the Midwest, and I grew up in a household that was mostly Sunday morning Christians. We didn't go to Bible study or anything during the week, but I did kind of grow up going to church pretty consistently every week. And then when I was, I think, around 12, I started the confirmation process, which took 2 years. And I think somewhere around that time, I remember having a conversation with some friends of mine who were older. And at the time it felt very radical, but one of them very loudly declared that they didn't believe in the Bible. And everybody else had these very, just a lot of, I can't believe that you would say that. Why wouldn't you? Kind of reactions. And I had a very different reaction. I remember when she said that, I was like, oh, that's interesting. Why not? And so I started talking to her about it. And at that point, I feel like I had been very much a slacker in Sunday school stuff, where I wasn't reading the Bible passages that were assigned for homework. It never really interested me all that much. But as soon as I was sort of introduced to this idea where it was actually optional, that I didn't have to be a part of this thing, I actually started paying more attention to what was being taught and what was supposed to be read. Church at that point had been very much like, you go on Sunday mornings, you zone out for an hour and you just kind of ignore whatever is going on, or you use it as a connection point with some friends. And then I started paying attention more to kind of what was actually being said around me and discussed, and then also paying attention to the things that I was supposed to be reading. And at that point, the question of why just really started to resonate with me. And I think that also is quite the theme throughout my professional life too. It really kind of inspired a lot of the writing that I do. Is just, I am constantly kind of curious about why something might be the case. And so at that point, once I started paying attention, I feel like my days were numbered within the church. And I believe as soon as I got I remember talking to my mom about it and telling her that it was not going to be for me. We struck a deal with each other because I was still very young, right? I was like 13, 14. And we struck a deal with each other, which was I would finish my confirmation process and then I didn't have to go anymore. I still ended up attending church, but only because I got a paid gig babysitting during church services. So I would still go to the church every week during the same time, but because I was paid to be there. So I felt a little bit better about it. And I was working in the kind of infant and 2-year-old room. So there was no discussion really of religion or anything. It was really chasing all of the little kiddos around, or, dealing with babies that were crying. So I felt like I kind of dodged a bullet in some ways. And thankfully, while my mom still went to church every week, it was a bit of a schism between us, but it wasn't nearly as bad as it could have been, I suppose is how I'd phrase it. And after that, I just kind of walked away and never really looked back.
That's amazing. By the way, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, but do you mind trying to adjust your settings again? For some reason, that hissing is back. But it's interesting that you mentioned that. Just curious. Whoops. Well, sorry, we'll give her 1 second here to come back. Looks like she disconnected from the camera there. Bring her back in here. 1 second. Here we go.
Okay, there we go.
Thank you so much. And by the way, everyone, I don't think it's an issue with Dr. Katie. I think it's I think StreamYard has certain issues with certain microphones. I'm gonna have to figure out why. I think I've seen it more than once. I think it's probably StreamYard's issue, but I'll be working on that. So I'm sorry about the hissing if you hear it. But I'm just curious with your having that difference of worldviews, even though that was obviously an issue between you and your family, what was it like just you and you, like you in your own head? Did you feel like you were at that point in danger of going somewhere bad when you died? Did you feel sad about people that died, that you might think, well, like maybe I won't see them again? I thought I was going to, but now I won't. How did you process it?
The thing that had really kind of resonated with me is I always really liked a challenge. I was an athlete growing up, and so I liked the idea of maybe I'm just being challenged. Maybe the actual thing is that like my faith needs to be more, maybe this is actually the thing that I'm supposed to be doing, which is challenging it and in order to come back to it. But as soon as I started sort of trying to break that down for me, I realized that I couldn't really come back to the idea that it was a challenge. It was like, for me, I had kind of understood that it was supposed to be hard, but at some point it didn't make much sense to me for it to be hard in that way. Especially when it felt like everything was being served to me right there. I had everything that I could ever possibly want, all of the resources, I had a community. and it still just didn't feel right. It always just felt kind of off to me. And at some point, I think the other important part of this is I met my best friend when I was 12, and he was Jewish. And it was a very interesting kind of experience to kind of go through that in the Midwest, where there wasn't a large Jewish population, but I kind of started to get more of the worldview from him, because I went to his bar mitzvah, for example, and I went to synagogue a couple of times, and I was like, oh, this is really, really different. A bunch of people are constructs, but very differently. And I automatically kind of had a distrust of the authoritarian sort of barkings from any pulpit, whatever it might have been from. And so I think for me, it was a little bit of, well, I also like these other people and they're not Christian, and that seems fine. I thankfully didn't kind of grow up in a household that was very heavily indoctrinated. I did have that in my family, but it was essentially kind of like those people had died out before I got too old. And my parents decided that they weren't going to force me to do any of that stuff aside from bargaining, to get me through confirmation. But I think I was also just kind of a pain in the butt as a child. And so I think my mom was trying to pick and choose her battles with me as far as, well, maybe she'll go to church and finish this out, but then she'll leave afterwards. And it's not a thing that she wanted to scream at me about. So I think, I was never worried about going to hell. It just, once I had asked the question why my friend didn't believe in the Bible, it never really resonated with me. I'd never internalized that hell was a real place. I feel really fortunate that I didn't have to break through that barrier, because I've watched people try to break through that barrier, and I know it's really hard. So I feel very fortunate there, but it is kind of amazing that for me, at the very least, that one question of just like, why don't you believe in the Bible? And then kind of the whole world that blew open for me. And I know that that's the case for a lot of people.
That's amazing. I'm jealous that you got out so early. It would have been great for a lot of us, I think, to get out early. For so many of us, it was presented in an authoritarian way, but it was so comprehensive, and we were so sheltered. I guess you might argue that there was no way to really escape. I mean, I guess some people kind of got by not really being too serious about it, but still kind of giving the verbal assent. Mm-hmm. But for a lot of us, we were in it to win it, and it became everything. I mean, I wasn't Christmas and Easter. I really believed, and I wanted to honor my Lord and Savior in every which way up until my mid 40s. But when you look at your journey from that point on, was there any kind of spirituality that you did get attracted to?
Not really. One of the things that I started noticing very early on was a lot of the people that were a part of the church that I went to. Some of them were fine, but I started noticing that a lot of people didn't seem to be practicing what they were preaching. And it was something that stuck out to me from an early age and really bothered me. And I think that actually might have been one of the reasons why my mom didn't push back on me too much about it, because I remember specifically having a conversation about one of the pastors, and I had seen him out not acting the best. I didn't catch him doing anything totally awful or anything, but it was certainly not quite in alignment with things that I had heard him say. And I had questions about it, and my mom didn't know how to answer them, and she wasn't very good on her feet, and she wasn't very good at kind of just, saying things on the spot just to kind of say them. And it just really didn't click for me of, why should this be the case for some people and not for others? That never really made much sense to me, and it was very confusing. And so at some point I just kind of decided that it didn't really make any sense. And so I was just going to throw the baby out with the bathwater, if you will. And I was never really attracted to any other spiritual practices. I think even the closest that I've really come is I've kind of been adopted into the Jewish community, because I know a lot of their prayers and because so many of my friends are Jewish, I've gone to so many celebrations and whatnot. And The running joke has just been Katie's, been the honorary Jew for a lot of her life, but I was never attracted to it as kind of an earnest belief that I had. It was more, again, just that social component of so many of my friends are a part of this. And so it's also interesting because I live in Colorado, there's a lot of kind of spiritual practices that happen out here. And I would even term it kind of spiritual wellness practices. And I feel like it's almost impossible to escape, especially if you're into mountain sports or kind of active at all in the Colorado scene. A lot of people will talk about, the spiritual practices that they have that are often sort of colliding with wellness practices. And so it might be, there are many yoga ashrams out here. There are a lot of kind of crystal stores out here, and all of that stuff just kind of collides into my professional life now. And it's interesting because I was never really drawn to it, but more felt repelled by it. And then my professional life has taken me kind of where it has.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've got an aunt out in Boulder, and I remember as a kid when I was still a Christian, we went out there to visit, and there's this one main street called Pearl Street. And I was told by my parents that Boulder at the time, at least, was considered the New Age capital of the world. And I don't know if that's true or not, or if still is, but it was like you'd see witches and every other store was selling crystals. And it was really, as a Christian, it was, freaky because you're thinking this is all demonic. And you almost kind of make yourself believe you can feel the demonic presence as if it's like thicker air here, you could cut it. But I definitely know what you mean. There's a lot of stuff woven together. When you look at your journey towards what you do now with the medical world, it sounds like there was an awful lot of overlap that was probably kind of getting you geared up and ready for what you do professionally. How did it evolve into you being more interested in medicine and the skeptical side of, the false medical stuff out there?
I think, as we were talking about kind of my journey out of the church, because I was never really a part of it, I didn't really feel like I was super connected to it. The questions of why have always really resonated with me. And I try really hard to be grounded in the things that I can see. And, I understand that faith kind of serves this other purpose where it's not about the things that you can see, it's about how you feel about something. And as I kind of grew up and as I've looked around during my professional career, I don't think that there's something inherently wrong with sort of being in service to how you feel about something, or how something makes you feel. But I wanted to kind of serve my community in a different way that was much more tangible and that kind of was irrefutable. Now, how irrefutable it is actually not, it's quite debatable at this point. But I wanted something that was tangible and that I could kind of point to and say, okay, this is much more grounded in, okay, I know I'm going to be able to affect change for a large number of people doing X, Y, or Z things. And here is how I know that, right? And I want it to be the kind of thing where I actually see changes on the ground. And so I wanted it to be very much, don't tell me what your priorities are, kind of show me by acting in a certain way. If I had to kind of summarize my philosophy, it's very much that, right? Don't kind of listen to what people say, look at how they behave. And I wanted to very much live by that. And so to me, I wasn't quite sure. I thought I might want to go into psychology for a while. I almost did go into psychology. And then I was introduced to the field of public health. And I had always been very interested in medicine, but I knew I didn't want to be a medical doctor. And so public health seemed like a very perfect kind of fit for me because it was like very tangible types of work that was also making a larger impact that you can actually point to and say, okay, I work on this very specific thing. And so I liked that. And I liked the idea of, trying to address suffering on the ground in real time and trying to make people's existence just a little bit better. Even if it was only for a small amount of time, that was the thing that really resonated with me. how I got into kind of the skepticism movement and critical thinking was I happened to fall into the realm of HIV and AIDS work. And there's a lot of conspiracy theories around HIV and AIDS in particular. I also worked in East Africa for a while. I worked in Kenya, and I would get a lot of conspiracy theories, not only around HIV, but then also kind of before 2020 even, when you do international kind of public health work, especially in an infectious disease, oftentimes it can feel like the final boss of a video game where all of the conspiracy theories are kind of percolating to the top and they're all rising together and to make this huge big bad. And so I was also encountering a lot of anti-vax talking points while I was working abroad. And so it was really interesting because as I was kind of coming up in my profession, I just started to encounter all of those things and all at once. And I saw how destructive it was. And oftentimes it was rooted in either in faith or a specific religion. And, kind of coming from that kind of background. And I just started seeing how devastating it could actually be. And it could be anything from conspiracy theories about the origin of HIV, all the way through, obviously vaccines are bad or whatever it might be. But, the way that those things play out on the ground is if you don't believe that HIV is real, or if you believe it's some sort of bioweapon, one of the things that can then happen is maybe you don't allow or take HIV meds. That has a very real impact on the people around you and on your community. And so it very quickly kind of collided with my world. And I found that it was the kind of thing where it's like, you can be doing this good work on the ground, trying to alleviate transmission of HIV and trying to fight stigma around it. But there's this thing that's impeding progress that, you can only do so much, you can only build so much before you really have to think about it and you really have to address it, right? It's always going to be the thing that's kind of putting a damper on your success in combating this thing, in combating this disease. But otherwise, you really need to start thinking about kind of misinformation around all of this stuff, how conspiracy theories are kind of happening in real time and how they're impacting your work. And so that was really my introduction into kind of what I ended up kind of turning into a writing career.
Well, that's amazing. It reminds me a little bit of when I was in New Guinea for a while doing some missions work, and they were telling us about animism, and they told us that there were some interesting stories of where some of the tribal women who had grown up in New Guinea in a just pure animistic environment, if that's the whole worldview, that some of them, they heard these stories where they would go to Australia to be fully trained as a nurse in a Western hospital. And they said there were stories where these animistic background nurses who fully understood like stuff like about bacteria and viruses and how people get sick and died, that even though they knew that stuff, that if someone did die in the hospital and they said to them, why did that person die? The answer would have a very high chance from that kind of nurse of being, they died from witchcraft. And it's like, it gets into your head. Like you just can't get past some of this stuff. In terms of just, since my channel is obviously focused on Christianity, do you see any recurring themes of things that Christians tend to deny in terms of things that you would say, if you just had, some skeptical thinking, you would see past that, but where the Christian worldview itself, or maybe the church's authority, something is keeping people stuck?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing so many kind of different sectors come together, but really I've been seeing this movement for a while where a lot of people that are kind of in the fundamentalist Christian camp, there's a big movement for home births and also kind of rejection of medicine and kind of getting back to some period of time. I'm not even really sure why. I can't even, oftentimes when we have this conversation, it's let's get back to when things were so much better and it's the 1950s, but I can't even say that because a lot of it is also, still like home birth movement. We don't want vaccines. We want raw milk. We want things that are more natural and more as God intended. And it's it's kind of fascinating to watch because there have also been several kind of medical breakthroughs that I think really resonated with, in particular, Christian populations. And the home birthing movement really has a home base in fundamentalist Christian sectors in the United States. I am not entirely sure why at this point, especially because one of the things that, when I was working in hospitals, obviously the birth rate and kind of the mortality rate in a hospital, we know what it is. And while we need to do work on it, it is certainly better than if we are leaving people to give birth at home, out in the wild. And so, having healthier families, I think, is something that I'm really at a loss for why that has become such a flashpoint in certain communities. Other than I think that there are some cultural, maybe there's some cultural identity that's been wrapped up in it. And I know that there have been certain churches that have really started to preach about where women especially should be and how kind of we should be thinking about our own health and well-being and having kids and whatnot. And I know that it's just, it's sort of become a virtue signal for people, just, rejecting the correct things. And for some reason, the correct things has become kind of medicine.
It's interesting. I started, before we jumped in, I started to say too that I'm probably going to do some devil's advocate work on this conversation. Mm-hmm. You're probably one of the first people that I've interviewed in a while, and I don't say this in any way to be offensive, but I think you're probably one of the first people I've had on here for a while that I think I really do come to a very different conclusion on some things. We had four kids, and the first one we were going to do a home birth for, and at the very last minute she said, "No, I think I want to go this quote unquote safer route." Very last minute switched to a hospital. It was an absolute nightmare. And the next three kids were home births, and they were beautiful. It was wonderful. It was just a peaceful, serene experience. We had midwives and midwives helpers, and it was just amazing. And it was beautiful. And I definitely feel like that was something where I would have easily wished that the first one was not in a hospital either. Again, it was a true nightmare. And one of the most it was just very disrespectful to her body across the board. So it's interesting that you say that, but I feel like I'm in a conundrum because I feel like a lot of the things that I think we often go against, we're dealing with an issue where the wisdom that we're looking at, like there's a sense of like that if someone has a PhD or someone went to this school, that like their conclusion is the right one. But we're also missing out on the fact that there's an incredible vast amount of knowledge that people have had for generations. And also it's different per culture. I mean, I think we would probably see a lot of people in this culture that would not put too much value in acupuncture. But if we were Chinese, probably we'd be having a very different discussion. There'd be a level of at least respect for what they do in acupuncture. And it's interesting. I told you I was going to bring up my story. Just to throw this out there for a minute. I was when I was a little boy, I got severe insomnia, like hardcore, life debilitating insomnia, where I couldn't sleep. I just couldn't from around age 8, and it got worse and worse and worse. And eventually, I was in all kinds of therapies and seeing the best doctors, PhD level doctors that would talk about. What therapies were out there, what medicines were out there. And I was like a guinea pig. And for 25, almost 30 years, I basically, it ruined my life. And I was up in Pennsylvania, and it was getting worse. And I was really concerned because, you hear about people that don't sleep much. Like if you don't sleep much, you pretty much are guaranteed to die early. It's messing with your brain. It's messing with your blood. It's messing with your hormones. You just like, this is really serious. And a friend of mine got me in touch with a doctor here in Georgia where I live now. And they said, there's this doctor, you're going to swear he's a quack, but he fixes things that nobody else fixes. And I got in touch with this doctor, and he said, move to Georgia. I'll fix it in a month with no medicine. I'm like, I've been on medicine. I've been one of the best doctors for 25 years. He's like, nope, I can fix it in a month. No matter, you don't need medicine. And sure enough, I came down to Georgia, took the adventure, and he seemed like a bit of a quack. And true to his word, in a month, after 25 years, with no medicine, I could sleep again. And it's weird because I'm not sure what to think about it all, because sometimes, the things that often end up being like the consensus in one generation are not in the next. Like I remember in terms of the biblical stuff that I more deal with, there was this Catholic scholar, Tommy Thompson, who way back, I don't know when it was, but he made the claim, even though he was a Catholic, he said, there's just no evidence that Moses and David existed. These guys did not exist. They were made up. And everyone laughed him. He got in big trouble with the Catholic school I think he was at. Everybody's like, you're an idiot. There's all kinds of evidence. And literally, like within one generation, it flipped, and all these scholars were saying, there's just no evidence these guys existed. And literally, just like one generation before, he was laughed to scorn. We've all seen those posters from back in the day where the doctors would literally recommend to pregnant women to have a cigarette. Like, how do you deal with that? These issues where there are people who are anecdotally saying, no, the traditional stuff didn't work, the non-traditional stuff did work. And also we're seeing the consensus flip within a generation. Like how do you approach those kind of topics?
I love this conversation. So first and foremost, thank you for it. And secondly, I'm really sorry to hear about the rough time it sounds like you had at the hospital with one of your kiddos. I'm really sorry about that. One of the things that I do think is important to point out, though, is you said something that I think is really, really pivotal and different than kind of the home birth movement that I was talking about. You said you had a midwife there. Midwives are actually trained to provide services if things go poorly. That's great. I'm talking about the home birthing movement for people that completely eschew any expertise and any training whatsoever and kind of go based off of vibes of like, I'm a woman, I know roughly how all of that stuff works and like, it'll be fine. There's a growing movement around that where people, home births are becoming more popular. If you want to do a home birth, totally your decision. Having a midwife there is one of the best decisions that I think that you can make, though, because it's safer for everybody. And so like, you don't want to go to the hospital, that's totally fine, but you're not eschewing kind of medicine, right? You had some of that stuff there in case something went badly. And so I think one, that's important to know because there are kind of gradients of these things. But, I also want to put a pin in the acupuncture conversation. I love having the acupuncture conversation with people because acupuncture has sort of become this flashpoint for certain people. But if you look at the history of acupuncture, it wasn't even popular in China. Chairman Mao decided that China should be more culturally dominant, a la kind of what the United States was at that point. And so they decided that one of the things that they wanted to kind of ship abroad from Chinese culture was acupuncture. But in my philosophy of kind of don't tell me what you believe, show me what you're doing, instead of training a whole bunch of acupuncturists in China, they threw money at science and technology. They trained physicians, not in acupuncture, they trained them in medicine, and they trained scientists. And they exported acupuncture as part of a cultural export. And so it's interesting because there's also a broader kind of conversation happening within the medical literature around what do we even do with studies that come out of China around acupuncture? Because if you really want to kind of dig in deep around the science of how this stuff is and kind of an entire base of literature around acupuncture. Statistically speaking, if a whole bunch of studies come out, if something works, most of them are going to show you that it works. However, not 100% of them will show you that it works because that's not how kind of life really is, right? And so some of them are going to show that there's no effect. It might be 1 in 100, it might be 1 in 1,000, but you'll have some that show no effect. Basically, every single study that comes out of China on acupuncture shows that it works, every single one. And so there's been a lot of conversation about what to do with scholarship that is coming into bad journals, they're predatory journals, and is coming out of potentially a conflict of interest. And so there's been a lot of conversation about what to do about that, because there's also a robust literature from other places that has a better methodology, just better studies that doesn't show that it works. And that, the placebo effect is a very real thing that happens, and it's an important conversation to have. But if you're seeing very good study designs that are consistently popping back with acupuncture is no better than placebo, that tells you that it's not actually doing anything. But then you have the flip side, which is acupuncture studies that are coming out of this one particular place are always showing that it works every single time. That's a problem, right? And unfortunately, this kind of conversation happens, in the background with a whole bunch of researchers. And some of it starts to leak out into the public consciousness, but not all of it. And so you don't get the entire context of what's going on and why it's important that this conversation is even happening. Then what happens is we're kind of on this collision course where people feel desperate because they might have something going on, and they don't know. They've tried so many things. And they just keep trying them, and nothing seems to be working. Nothing seems to be getting better. And then finally one day it gets better after supplement, after acupuncture, after whatever the thing might be. And we are wired to want to find a pattern. And so I did X, therefore, if Y happened after it, Y was caused by X. But that's not always the case, even if it really seems like that for us. I do this all the time. I joke about it even when I do it, because I'll try to be aware of myself doing it, but I'll absolutely do it, right? Just because something preceded an outcome that I wanted, I'll just be like, well, then I always need to tie my shoes left to right, and that's the thing that I need to do because it caused this other outcome, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that like the way that I tied my shoes made me have like a better race or something like that, right? And so I'm oversimplifying things, but I think at the end of the day, that's kind of the collision course that we're on. Is there's a lot of conversation kind of going on in the background of biomedical researchers and medical research kind of more broadly, and then what's going on in the public consciousness and what permeates the public consciousness, and then also people's lived experience. And I would never want to go up to somebody and be like, that's not actually what happened to you, right? I would never want to say that because I don't know. I wasn't there. I'm certainly not going to tell people about their experience. But what I will say is our brains are kind of wired to give us easier answers. And so we use a lot of tips and tricks to get us to an answer that is more functional for our day-to-day lives. And so those heuristics can be really useful in the day-to-day, but actually break down when we start trying to piece together, bigger stories about how something happened. And also because we're wired to look for patterns and whatnot, that's what we're always going to seek out, is just patterns. Like what is the thing? I'm really looking for it, because it's unsatisfying to say, I don't know. It's unsatisfying to feel like you don't know. And so it's really interesting, because I would never want to tell people that like you should always listen to every expert, because one of the things about science, and one of the things that I love about science, is that it's constantly changing and we're evolving with better evidence, right? That's a feature, that's not a bug. It also doesn't mean that we're lying about what the conclusions are right now. But it also doesn't mean that everything that we know is also bunk. If we evolve with new evidence, it doesn't mean that we were lying before, and it doesn't mean that we didn't know anything. It just means that now we've kind of evolved our view to incorporate the new information, and so that's constantly happening. And so it's really interesting, because then you're also you mentioned the cigarette stuff. Man, that story of how the tobacco industry permeated so much of the world, and how they basically made marketing make the world go round is really fascinating. And I think a really good cautionary tale for everybody to remember, because there are real conspiracies out there. I would argue that the tobacco industry and how much they covered up for how long they knew that smoking was bad was a real conspiracy. The problem is real conspiracies have evidence behind them. They don't stay secrets for long. We're not very good at keeping secrets. And so there is actual evidence. We can point to documentation around, internal memos and correspondence for different tobacco executives basically saying like, bury this study or, whatever it might be. We can actually point to that. We know what was going on there. But it's important that people understand kind of the differences between conspiracy theories and then like actual conspiracies that there is evidence for. And I know that it's a slippery slope because if you believe in a specific conspiracy, you're always going to be like, but there's so much evidence for it. But then we have to have a whole conversation about what evidence even looks like. And at some point, it almost becomes a matter of faith, right? And it's interesting because in the wellness industry and in sort of pseudoscience and medicine, a lot of this also kind of comes back to, are you a true believer or not? And the conspiracy theory world very much becomes about community, and it becomes about trying to break people out of their community, which sucks. You don't want to do that, but also you kind of have to. And it's the same trauma of people leaving the church or leaving whatever community that was theirs and walking away from it. They experience that same trauma. And so it's really hard to get through to certain people that have adopted these beliefs, because at some point it isn't about that belief anymore. It's about the people around them and the community that's been built.
Yeah. Can I ask, one of the words that I think comes up a lot with the sort of stuff that you deal with is when you talk about critical thinking, you're talking about trying to keep people from being manipulated.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of us are really struggling with the fact that it does feel like this world is more and more and more manipulative in general, whether it's because of the internet or social media or whatever.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us would say right now that the political systems are manipulating us heavily. A lot of us don't even know where to start, because it's like, how do you, and I think this is where maybe someone like, you maybe this is your main task, I would guess. But for a lot of people that are saying, I'm tired of being manipulated, but also I know that the story of like whoever's winning the battle is going to get the story of what the truth is.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, when you look at something, for example, like vaccinations, you do see people on both sides bringing up some really, really, really good points. And I'm not an anti-vaxxer, but I do see some really good points that they're bringing up and some really big concerns. And the reality is, unless you know where the money flow is, and nobody on the lay level is going to know where the money flow is, unless you know where the money flow is, unless you know where the power struggles are, and none of us in the lay level will ever know that, unless you know what information is being withheld, both in terms of public information, but also just in terms of training. Like, you got trained in your field. I got trained in theology. I would argue that when I went to Bible school, and I was around some high level PhD people, I went to a very big Bible college university, and there were probably hundreds of PhD level theologians there. I would argue they kept a lot of information from me. I wouldn't know that. I didn't know that, even though I was neck deep in the system and trying to perpetuate it. I didn't know that. Years later, as I did my own research, it's like, goddamn, whatever, you didn't tell me the truth. Like, where did this religion come from? You never told me about the mythology. And it was frustrating to realize I was part of a system, and to know that at the highest levels, they kept basic information from me.
Mm-hmm.
But, even though you went and got a PhD, you wouldn't know who was pulling levers behind the scenes that you just were ignorant of. At this point, it feels like our world is entering a very dangerous phase where it feels like everybody is manipulating everything. Where do you even start when there's really good reason to say I'm skeptical of the consensus? Therefore, I'm a skeptic, but now I'm skeptical of the skeptics too.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like it's hard to know who to trust about anything, whether we're talking about religion or medicine or anything.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the biggest frustration points that I feel is it's very easy to flood the zone with shit. And when you do that, it isn't that you're necessarily perpetuating conspiracy theories. That's part of it. And that's a part that I specifically work on. But I think the greater damage there is from sort of innocent bystanders perspective, or people that are just kind of lurking in the background and just being voyeurs and kind of watching the comments and seeing how things unfold, what ends up happening is this like, throw up my hands, no one knows anything, therefore, and that's actually, I think, more damaging than the conspiracy theories themselves. And no one can blame anybody for feeling that way. I feel that way constantly at this point, because it's just, there's so much that it's like, well, then if no one knows anything, then I guess I'm just left to my own devices. The problem, though, is, one of the things that we talk about in the skepticism movement a lot is critical thinking. And some of the tenets of critical thinking are kind of understanding the logical fallacies, the cognitive biases, and thinking about thinking. And one of the problems that we kind of see, especially in media, is there can be this false balance that's proposed that in reality is not actually there. So a good example of this is, I don't know how old you are, but I wonder if you remember seeing commercials on TV for a gum that was like 9 out of 10 dentists recommend blah, 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 right?
Yep.
So if 9 out of 10 dentists recommend something and you platform one of those dentists that falls into the 9 and you have an interview with that person, and then you find the one dentist that disagrees and you basically like interview both of them and you're like, this is both sides of the issue. All of a sudden those 9 dentists get like sucked into the one person that's representing them and you can't see them. And then the one person all of a sudden becomes very outsized and their perspective becomes much bigger than it actually is. Now that's a silly example because like 9 out of 10 dentists are not actually recommending whatever, right? But they might be recommending like toothpaste or something. But in general, it becomes this perception of false equivalency and false balance. And there are plenty of kind of arguments that we're having that are not actually arguments. It's just, we're trying to be fair. So we want to show that there are 2 sides to every issue. And some issues, frankly, there are not 2 sides on. If we're trying to be based in kind of the best science that we have, there really aren't 2 sides to some of these issues. But you'll get plenty of people that are like, no, but there really are. And if we are trying to be more grounded in science and what we can see in reality, why are we platforming some of these conversations that truly, they aren't based in kind of fact and they're not based in reality? And that feels like censorship to people. But also it's really damaging if that's what you're trying to tackle, right? Because then if you do present both sides as though they both have equal weight, then yeah, what the natural extension of that is people being like, well, no one knows anything, so I'm just going to go do my own thing over here. And that's not actually true, right? It's then really easy to dismiss a lot of really hard fought for knowledge. And at this point, it's really fascinating to kind of watch us regress and reject things that we have worked so hard to learn and so hard to kind of bring into society to kind of make things better. And so it's been really interesting to kind of watch that phenomenon play out, especially in the last 6 years or so. Because yeah, it's crazy. And it really is just so damaging.
I would agree that I think there's definitely ways in which we're at a spot where it's hard to know. I mean, I think it's hard too, because, for someone like me, for example, again, not playing devil's advocate intentionally, but just saying like I had to, in my life, on 2 major levels, both with the sleep as well as with my religious worldview, I had to look at all the PhDs around me and say, you all don't know what you're doing. And I'm going to go with the minor non-consensus view on religion and on medical stuff. And both of them, I would argue, saved my life. Mm-hmm. I certainly got saved by, going to a quack doctor to fix my insomnia. And surely, you would have thought he was like quack. He was spinning me in chairs and doing weird things, and sticking his fingers down my throat. It was a weird thing. It was like 3 hours of the weirdest stuff. You'd say, this guy's a nut job, but he saved my life. And I've heard endless stories of him saving other people's lives. For anyone that's curious, just in case you want to know, he was called a neurological chiropractor. I'd been to chiropractors for many years. They'd never made much of a difference to me, but Most chiropractors will say your brain's amazing. It'll just open up your nerve pathways. Let's just open them up, and the brain does it. Neurological chiropractors say, no, your brain can still send out the wrong messages. And that's what happened with me. He said, your brain's sending the wrong messages. We're not going to work on your back. We're going to work on your brain. But again, it radically changed my life in a month. And he worked himself out of a job. I didn't need to go anymore. It was amazing. And you think, you look at other doctors who are like, you need to keep coming, more prescriptions for decades. This guy, 30 days, I didn't need to see him again. I haven't seen him in 15 years. But more importantly, perhaps religion, I was surrounded by PhD level scholars who would say there's so much evidence this is real and good. And it's like you do end up realizing that so many of decisions in your life are going to be the road less traveled. And I think that's where it's really hard. I find myself very much in a conundrum with some of the topics that I see. And I also feel like we're at a spot where it's hard to know who to trust, because you do see some things where some things like, that doesn't sound right. Like I remember years ago, I was getting a vaccine, and I asked the doctor, do you get any pushbacks? Or I'm sorry, not pushback. Do you get any paybacks from the vaccine company for giving me this? He said, oh yeah, I get money from every single vaccine I give. I get money from that company. I appreciated his honesty, but I was like, so there's a motivation to get people vaccinated. I personally wanted to get vaccinated, so it wasn't like he was pushing it on me. I wasn't in that category where he was manipulating me. I asked for it. But I'm like, later I thought about that. I thought that's a little shady. And so I think there's a real opportunity for us to say we need like people who have nothing to do with the money movement behind the scenes to be analyzing medical stuff more, because for lay people, like we're completely out of our league. We have no way to know. And I guess on that note, I did want to ask you, like, what are some of the things that you would say in terms of advancements people like should know and should do, but they're like not doing because they're too skeptical, or too not skeptical, but they're too into conspiracy theories, and other things that are getting pushed to the front that you're like, wait a second, red flags everywhere. You all shouldn't be doing this. That just the wellness community is pushing in terms of manipulation. What are some of those two sides? I would just be curious to see what are the negatives and positives you're seeing there.
Yeah. I will circle back to this, but can I just say for a second, so it sounds like your story, especially around walking away from the church and also kind of with some of the medical stuff potentially, it sounds like you were actually engaged in some pretty good and fundamental critical thinking principles. And one of the very first things that we talk about and that we try to teach is sort of evaluating assumptions, trying to understand what the both spoken and unspoken assumptions are that are being made. And so I think for your journey with religion, it sounds like you started to try to really identify what the assumptions were that were being made. And it's not a bad practice to question what are at the end of the day, what assumptions are holding something up. And that's something that I encourage people to look at and to critically try to evaluate, right? Trying to really understand, why are we assuming that this person existed? Tell me more about how that is, right? And so critically appraising kind of what those spoken and unspoken assumptions are, I think is really, really important. And at the end of the day is also something that I work a lot on. And because with wellness stuff in particular, it ends up being a lot of virtue signaling towards people. And one of the things that drives me the craziest is somehow supplements have become this virtue signal and have become a cure-all. And nothing could be further from the truth, I think, for both of those things. I mean, okay, I suppose it could be a virtue signal without me. There's nothing that I can really do about that. But like, supplements have become the way that I think people are now trying to show that they are taking their health into their own hands. And what's fascinating is there are a lot of unspoken assumptions there, especially around this is healthy for me, this is regulated in some way, and that it's completely safe. So the worst case scenario is I'm doing nothing to myself. That is not at all the case, right? Worst case scenario is actually a lot worse than that. And you're definitely not necessarily doing something good for yourself just because something sounds natural or is billed as being good for your health in a pill form doesn't mean that it is. And it's fascinating because especially with supplements, it's been really interesting to watch what's happening there because supplements are so popular in the influencer crowd and in the wellness world. And it's usually the people that will complain about big pharma and how corrupt big pharma is and how much they hate big pharma. And then they'll turn around and buy supplements. And it's fascinating to me because there's, again, a lot of unspoken major assumptions are happening there. But what's most interesting about it is they're making the assumption that pharma companies don't own supplement companies. And I got to tell you, not true. And at this point, that's how a lot of pharma companies are making their money. They're not really making it on drugs as much anymore because drugs are heavily regulated and it is expensive to go through drug testing. Supplements, not regulated. You can churn out a new supplement very quickly and make a lot of money on it. And it doesn't even have to contain the things that you say it contains. And so it's really fascinating to kind of watch what's happening with that kind of collision of people being like, we don't even know who to trust anymore. All of this just seems like there's just too much. So I'm just going to take matters into my own hands, and I'm going to start taking vitamin C, and I'm going to take some zinc, and I'm going to take some ashwagandha, and I'm going to take, and it kind of goes on and on and on down the line. And it's fascinating because it's really been appealing to a broad swath of people. It's really been the case that it isn't just kind of one single pocket. It's all over the place now, right? I mean, truly, if you're an influencer with any sort of significant following and you don't have a supplement, you are leaving money on the table.
I guess that's my next step, right?
yeah, exactly. You should have your own supplement line.
I'll work on that. What can I ask? What we've talked sort of generically. Can you tell me some of the things that are just like, oh my God, I can't believe that's a thing, but people are doing it and buying into it left and right? I mean, I know you mentioned like the supplements, but like, what are some of the other wellness things that you would say? I can't believe people are so suckered into that.
Supplements are really one of the biggest ones. I think the other thing, and it makes me sad, but the internet is really helping us to develop parasocial relationships with a lot of different people that we obviously don't know in real life, right? So I'm sure that there are people that feel attached to you, but they don't know you, but they watch you every week. So they do feel like they know you. Influencers really get to grab onto that and take advantage of it. And one of the things that's fascinating about it is that I think it's reflective of how much people just kind of want someone to feel like is listening to them or kind of gets them or is interested in engaging around their health, because the way that our system is set up and structured isn't for a lot of one-on-one time with a physician, with a provider, et cetera, et cetera. And that sucks. And I'm here to tell you that like physicians also think that it sucks. No one wants to be kind of in this system that we've created. It just sucks for everybody. It sucks for the patients. It sucks for the physicians. It sucks for just everyone, truly. But like influencers are really predatory about it. And so it's like, oh, I care so much about your health and well-being. I really do. And I'm going to spend 6 hours on my Instagram or making TikTok videos every single day, telling you how much I care about you and plugging my supplement line, plugging my wellness store. And you know how much I care. Go bop over in my store. It's 30% off today because I really want you to have this thing because it's going to make you healthier. Truly not going to make you healthier, is going to make their pocketbook a lot fatter though. And so it's fascinating because like we're watching the wool being pulled over people's eyes in real time. And we've seen this play, but it's not new. They're not doing anything new. Like the format might be new, right? Social media wasn't necessarily around 30 years ago, but what they're doing, not new at all. It's the oldest playbook around. And it does actually make me really sad because I think it is reflective of just more people being hungry for someone to talk to that seems qualified about their health and about like their concerns. And the way that our system is structured, very few people get to do that. And that sucks. So that's one of those things that I think I'm seeing a whole lot of, and I want to be very clear that, like, just be careful about who you are following and how you feel about those people and how much of your money you're giving to those people. And also, your attention is also money, right? So I think it's also important that people really start to think about who they are giving their attention to, and if it's a good thing or not.
I'm curious. I have a tough time with some of these topics because I've seen over and over where people will land on different sides where they will both have come to, they've done a lot of research. I've got a friend of mine that's does extensive research on things like vaccines and raw milk, and has probably come to the opposite conclusion as you. I'm more in the middle about some of these topics. I've seen some amazing benefits with my kids have been drinking raw milk since they were born, and they still do. And it's helped their guts a lot, I'm sure. But I see both sides. Like, I see people that say there's some awful reasons for this. And the question is, like, I need to be, like, they start with the same premises as all of us are. I'm skeptical of both sides. I'm skeptical that I'm being manipulated. I'm skeptical of what's being fed to me in terms of the information or lack thereof. And I'm going to go do my research. I don't mean a 12-minute video on YouTube there from an expert. I mean, like, months worth of looking at all sides of it. And they come to a conclusion, and it's the opposite. Where I know people that would say raw milk is never good, for us. Again, it's my kids have drunk it for years, and I'm sure they still will for the rest of their lives, and it's helped them a lot. Someone else is going to say that's the worst thing. What in the world are you doing for them? And I think you mentioned the idea of the assumptions, and I guess maybe a bigger topic than raw milk would be for the topic of vaccines. Like, what assumptions? How do we look at the assumptions, even in something that's like those of us that tend to be skeptical? And I'm making a broad assessment here. I might be wrong, but I think those of us that tend to think of ourselves as skeptical are probably more pro-vaccine. But forgive me if I'm wrong, community. But I'm seeing that there are assumptions in the pro-vaccine movement that's kind of scare me. And it's also not just the assumptions themselves, but the idea that you can't ask those questions. You just have to assume the party line. And like, that's what I came from. I came from, you must assume the party line of Christianity by and large. Mm-hmm. I'm used to the party line being like, you can't question it. And it's a weird thing to have gone from fundamentalism and Christianity to becoming an atheist, and yet in the atheist community seeing an awful lot of fundamentalists in the atheist community. And I think it's a real struggle at this point. I mean, you mentioned supplements, and I don't want to get into that too much, but I'm not sure how to proceed with some of these topics, because I've seen people do some incredible research, and I think if we brought them in, and I'm not going to, but if I brought them in, you all would be at polar opposites, and yet both of you have done incredible, huge amounts of research. What do you do when people have done that and like, nope, you don't know the research? Like, no, you don't. But they both have been skeptical. It's not like somebody said, no, I'm putting my fingers in my ears, I don't want to hear anything. They have both sides have gone on and saying, I want to look at all the evidence. And looking at all the evidence, two people come to two completely different conclusions. We're talking more about medical here, but going to religion, someone looks at the Bible and where it came from and all this evidence, and someone else looks at it, and one person's a true blue believer, like, I love my Lord Jesus Christ and his Bible is the word of God, and someone else says this is mythology and it's irrelevant and it's toxic. So many of us are like, if we're going to really ask the hard questions, we're also going to have to admit that we're all going to look at sometimes the same set of information and say, the conclusion we're coming to is literally the polar opposite. Like, are we looking not at the conclusion, just at the information as to how to make a conclusion? We both look at the same set of information, and both of us go to polar opposites, and both of us say, you're not looking, look at what the information says. There's a huge benefit for raw milk. There's a huge reason to not be vaccinated. And someone says, are you kidding me? There's a ton of reason not to do raw milk, and there's a ton of reasons to do vaccines. And it's like, I think a lot of us get caught up right in that middle section. And we're just like you, I think you said it earlier, like, we just don't know. And that's a dangerous place to be, though. But at the same point, it's an honest place to be, to say, and I think it's getting worse with MAGA, in my opinion, because now, like, I'm here in Atlanta. I'm just north of Atlanta in a little town called Alpharetta, but CDC is just 30 minutes south of me. It's like the story's changing, and it's like, who do are we going to really believe our Robert Kennedy? I don't think so. But at the same time, at that point, we are left with questioning a lot of things. I mean, where do you go with this when people look at the same information and they really do hard work and they go opposite?
Yeah, it's a really hard question to answer, and I do think at some point we will there will always be people that kind of dissent from each other, as far as like, yeah, I can look at the exact same set of information and come to a different conclusion. But I think one of the unstated premises here that is really important to consider is information echo chambers and information bubbles, because not all information is created equal. Not all information is created of the same quality, and not everybody has access to the same information. And so some people are going to have, and everybody has access to a lot of information. The question is, what kind of information do they have access to? Do they have access to high quality information? Do they have access to a lot of high quality information, or just a little bit? Do they know the difference? Can they tell the difference? I think most people want to say yes. I think, though, however, especially with the rise of AI, the answer now is concerningly no. And I do include everybody in this, right? It is becoming harder and harder to determine what is high quality information and what is not. And one of, I think, the biggest arguments that we're having right now, kind of in the background, about what RFK Jr. is doing and kind of the Maha movement, is it's been very brazen that they have just straight up made things up or allowed AI to make things up, and then are trying to pass it off as health policy because it's completely what they believe, but is not what is based on high quality information. And so it's a really, in this moment, like, critical thinking, I think, is more important than it's ever been before. And it's crazy because I feel like every year I felt that way, but with the rise of AI and with the rise of social media, I think it really is more important now than ever. And whenever I was teaching, I would always make sure that we would have a conversation about, okay, if I'm running a journal club, for example, and we're discussing a study, it's really the thing that people get taught is like, engage on the merits. Let's talk about the methodology. And not everybody understands how methodology works. Not everybody understands statistics, fine, but you understand that's what you're supposed to be talking about. But there's another part of that, which is, where did this come from? What do you know about the journal? What do you know about the authors? What do you know about the data? And it's become really difficult to kind of ask those questions because people will get very, very attached to certain sets of information, be it high quality or not. And so it's very easy to kind of be pointing at each other and saying, like, no, your set of information is bad. No, your set of information is bad. But I do think it's really important to kind of acknowledge echo chambers here and information bubbles. And again, not everybody has the same access to high quality information. And so I think, at the end of the day, yes, you are correct. I think that there will always be sort of humans are specifically built with, evolution has made it so that we all think a little bit differently, so that some of us are going to be better at propagating our genes and surviving. And those are, going to be the genes that get passed on, but like it rewards variability. And by rewards, I mean, we benefit from having a lot of different points of view of things, but that doesn't mean that there isn't going to be kind of a better objective truth than for a lot of things, right? Like, we can disagree about philosophies, we can disagree about theology, we can disagree about some of these things, but there are going to be other things that have objectively kind of moved society forward and allowed us to live for longer, that, even if people disagree, it could just be because they don't have access to high quality information. And they might have done months of their own, reading, but they didn't, stuff is behind paywalls, literally, right? And so like the things that I'm reading are likely very different than the things that some other people are reading. And I have feelings about that, right? And there's been a lot of movement around trying to get access, like publicly available access to some of this stuff. But like, it is fascinating because we all exist in the same world, but we aren't existing in the same ecosystems. And so it, at the end of the day, does come down to comparing like, well, this is my information and this is your information, and who has more context, who has access to better quality information. And so it's hard. But I do think it's worth the conversation, and I think it's worth people trying to actually critically appraise what kind of information do I have access to. And that's really all that critical thinking is about, is thinking about your own thinking and how it might be biased, and how your feelings might be influencing how you're thinking about something. And this, I think, collides very nicely with the theology conversation, right? The religion is based on how it makes you feel. And it really does, it indoctrinates really strong feelings, which is, how it becomes so controlling and how it becomes so manipulative and all of these things. But if we're trying to do this large experiment of society all together, we have to kind of go deeper than how something makes you feel and start to think about how you're thinking about all of it, right? And so those conversations, I think, get left out of that conversation that you were talking about, as far as like, well, we've both read things and we came to opposite conclusions. Yes, but we're not reading the same things is the thing, right? The major unstated premise of what you said is like, we're all reading the same things and we're just not. And we're not surrounded by the same information.
Could I ask, just to be more specific? And by the way, I see a bunch of comments coming in. I appreciate you all so much. I will get to your comments in just a few minutes. But can I ask, we all know that the COVID vaccine was obviously a big hot button for a lot of people. Wearing masks was, but the COVID vaccine was even more important of a hot button issue. And I'll, full disclosure, I did get the vaccine and the booster, whether I should have or not. I did get the vaccine and the booster. But let's just say, for sake of argument, that in 2 years, COVID 2.0 comes. It's something different, but they need to make a vaccine quick, and people, it's like in another Ebola, so to speak, is coming our way, and we're in deep shit if we don't get some kind of fix. And the same kind of issues come up again, where people are like, you know what, I'm not sure this time if I want to get it, or maybe they didn't before, and like, I'm still not sure if I didn't get the first one and I was fine, and maybe I'll be fine the second time. What are some of the thought processes that you would encourage people to go through when the next big thing hits? And hopefully it won't, but if it does, this is a very relevant topic. How do we determine, maybe they pushed the vaccine through too quickly? Maybe they were told to do so by Donald Trump, and whatever. And it's like, when you don't know, again, the money flow behind the scenes, the power struggle behind the scenes, and the information or lack thereof, it's really hard to make a decision. And I'm not just talking about a paywall. I'm talking about like deep behind the scenes stuff that no one's ever going to know. It doesn't matter how many paywalls you paid for, you're never going to know the stuff behind the scenes. There's people in play, there's things at play, like I don't ever expect to know what, the Secret Service does, in their meetings. I never expect to know what the CIA talks about. Those are private meetings that none of us will ever be privy to. That same kind of stuff is going to happen in terms of medical stuff too. We won't know those decisions. We won't know those private talks. And then we have to make a decision for ourselves, and especially for our kids. What would you encourage people to think through if this ever happens again?
For me, it really does kind of come back to being able to appropriately assess people's expertise, if it's based on vibes or if it's based on, no, this person was trained and has spent a career kind of learning how to do this thing. And I don't mean that as follow people blindly. That's not at all what I'm suggesting. But what I am suggesting is, the best that we can all do is, when I try to adopt a scientific mindset, is, okay, what do we know? How do we know it? And kind of where is the consensus right now? The consensus of the actual experts, of like people that are working on this. And especially when you're talking about something that is a rapidly unfolding situation like COVID was, it's interesting because my perspective on it is very different than I think most people's, which is when COVID happened, I watched some incredible science happen very quickly, faster than it's ever happened before. And to me, it was hopeful. And I watched it and I was like, oh, wow, we're able to respond to this kind of novel pathogen now so quickly, which I know it didn't feel that way. I know it didn't. But, you know, in the past, it would have taken so long for us to, I think HIV is a great example here. HIV happened and it killed millions of people for a very long time before we even had anything at all that resembled a treatment. And we've now made so much progress on it. We've got great prophylaxis. We've got great treatment. You know, people can live long, healthy lives being HIV positive and not transmitting it. And that's such a success story. But that success story took decades. COVID stuff has not taken decades. It's been 6 years. And like, you know, we've got an effective vaccine, and yes, viruses mutate. So yes, we do have to have different vaccines, but like, it's just been fascinating to watch, because I think at the end of the day, it's really difficult to say in a novel situation like that, then what we have to do is kind of go with what we know. Not how we want to feel about something. Because one of the things that happens, especially in uncertain situations, is people can swoop in and kind of make you feel a certain way and make you feel more confident. But just because they sound confident doesn't mean that they are confident. And I think one of the things that I constantly say to people is, if your provider says, I don't know, that doesn't mean that they're a bad provider. It doesn't mean that they're a bad doctor. It means that they're being honest with you. And that's actually a sign, I think, of a really good doctor. If they say, I don't know. And like that feels bad, because you want somebody that seems like they know everything. But the problem with people that seem like they know everything is they're usually bullshitting you, right? And I think, you know, most people probably don't want to be bullshitted, even though bullshitting can make you feel good. It can make you feel really good, and it can make you feel just better in an uncertain situation. And sometimes we prioritize that because it feels so out of control and so scary. And I super get that, because I do the same thing. But it's also just really important to, I think, be very self-aware of like of how you are feeling, and how it might be influencing how you're thinking about something.
When you look at the people that have been in the wellness communities, it seems like one of the biggest issues is just the anecdotes. I gave my anecdote of my insomnia. When I was a Christian, there was just an overwhelming number of people who were pushing essential oils. That was major. I could tell stories, but the issue is I think too, where the anecdotes become so important. I mean, I heard so many anecdotes of essential oils, you know, kids who had ADHD, whatever symptoms, they'd rub this oil and that oil and before they went to bed, and the ADHD, autism, whatever, it dissipated. Certainly people with breathing problems, this and that. And what do you do with people that, you know, a lot of us are going to go with anecdotes. And I think, again, a lot of this relates to Christianity, because that one of the biggest reasons that I think people stay in Christianity is because they have been so tricked for so long with the experience as the evidence. Is like, I know that there's like comparative mythology concerns. I know there's discrepancies in the Bible. I know there's moral atrocities. You know, Yahweh commands genocide and, you know, stoning. And it's like, I know that stuff sounds like it might be evidence that maybe my Christian worldview isn't true. But at the end of the day, I have actually felt God's presence. I have prayed and I felt his peace. I've prayed for, you know, God, do you want me to go through door 1 or door 2? And he clearly makes it obvious which door to go through. And I remember one of the first conversations I had with somebody when I talked about my deconversion was this exact issue. It was like, I was trying to tell them about where that the Gospels are in many ways based on Greek mythology. And they were like, listen, I don't even care. Like, you can talk all you want. You can talk for the next 2 days about that stuff. I have experienced God practically. And I think there's a real strong parallel with this stuff of like, I have seen essential oils basically do what no other medicine could do. And I'm not doubting all that. I'm not saying that all of it is wrong, because you could say, well, Tim, you went the traditional medical consensus route for 25 years and it ruined your life. You went with a quack doctor and it fixed your life in 30 days. Like, that's my experience. How do we process the fact that our experiences sometimes lead us to some good conclusions, but sometimes just some really completely wrong conclusions? And also the fact that we're not necessarily looking at ourselves, so we're looking at the community. But you mentioned the word echo chamber, or the phrase echo chamber. In a lot of these communities, especially religious ones, I would argue, but also just spirituality ones, where it's all about certain practices. We get to a point where we're like, yeah, like my life was just so empty before. And I think we get sucked into with the fact that we look at some of these claims and they're like, this is the way they did it in ancient generations, that would like that pull to like the simpler times. Back in the day, it was so easy and so good and so beautiful. And you end up too, like, where some of these, they'll merge like maybe essential oils with something like breathing practices or yoga. And some of those things might be really, really good for you. They might literally slow your heart rate down and help your breathing. And you're like, I am literally changing my life positively. I'm exercising more. I'm stretching more. And it becomes like a holistic thing where all these areas of your life feel like they're so much better for you. You just feel at home in your own skin. And yet, I think if you're skeptical, you have to say some of these things are more anecdotal and they're not all actually making you better, but maybe a few of them are. But that doesn't mean that this is medically sound way to live. It's just really hard to know what to do with that. What do you do when people say, Dr. Katie, I don't care what the medical things say. I have seen it. I have seen essential oils are better than any vaccine. What do you do with that conversation?
Yeah, it is hard. And I think a lot of it is we are social creatures and we use stories and narrative to connect with each other. And it's a way to kind of signal, hey, I feel a certain way and I want you to feel that way too, right? It's a bonding experience. And bonding experiences are really powerful. There's a reason why we are wired this way. But even then, we touched on this earlier, just because some, X preceded Y in time doesn't mean that X caused Y, for example. One of my favorites is like somebody gets sick and do everything medical convention wise, none of it helps, and then take a tincture and all of a sudden you're better. Okay, sure, that was your experience. I can't argue with that. That's what happened. But importantly, missing context there, you probably had a virus and there's very little that we can do about said virus, and viruses tend to get better on their own without anything, right? And so it's one of those things of like, did the tincture actually make you better? Or was it because you had a virus and, viruses tend to go away. They run their course and they tend to go away, right? Some of them don't, but you kind of see what I'm saying. And so it is really, I think, just important for us to understand the stories that we tell ourselves and kind of the purposes that they serve, and try to think more about what those stories are doing for us, right? And thinking about the major assumptions that the stories might have, and the purpose that they're serving for us personally, how they're making us feel, and why it's important that we feel that way about that story, or what it does for us, right? Just, again, being kind of more self-aware and trying to critically appraise, what is it that I'm thinking and why do I think this way? That's really it. I mean, I'm certainly not going to tell people like, that's not what happened to you. That's not your experience. And I think anybody that does that, in the science communication world, we talk about it a lot. You're kind of a jerk to do that. Like, why would you do that? You're not going to tell people, you're not going to like invalidate someone's experience. We don't want to do that. That's terrible. But it is one of those things where I think one of the best things that we can do is just try to be as self-aware as possible about kind of how we are thinking about things and how we're making judgments, because we use a lot of shortcuts and we use a lot of tools, and those things can be really useful on a day-to-day, but again, on a broader picture, might not give us an accurate picture of kind of what's going on and why. Right. And so I think that's really it. Like, again, I'm not going to invalidate somebody's stories. It's just more like, let's really try to understand what the assumptions are here.
A few quick quirky questions for you, and then we'll get to the questions from the live stream comments. And again, I appreciate everybody's patience. In terms of the wellness community, is there anything that you have personally ever looked at in the wellness community where you were skeptical at first, but it's actually helped you, where you would do it now?
Yeah, actually. So health coaching, I came to as just extraordinarily skeptical. And I want to be clear, I'm still skeptical of it. However, I do think that with kind of appropriate guardrails around it, I think it could be very powerful. The problem with it now is, it kind of grew out of the wellness world and influencer world, and there's no regulations around who identifies as a health coach. Anybody can. And that's my objection to it, right? Is that like anybody at all can say, I'm a health coach, and then start telling people how to live healthily. I have objections to that. However, if we put some guardrails around it, I think it could be really powerful, because I think it could be one of those things where it's like, okay, obviously there's a hunger for people to spend time one-on-one talking with someone about their health concerns. I think health coaching could potentially be the thing that like helps us with that. Honestly, I think it could be really, really good. It's just a matter of like, we need to do some things with it and put some guardrails around it, because it can't just be vibes based.
Right. Well, the other quirky question I have for you is, have you ever, this is diverging a little bit from both religion and from medical, but have you ever sort of engaged in a conversation with someone who's a flat earther, and how has that gone, and what did you do, and how did you wrap that conversation up?
Yeah, okay, so I have, but also one of my fun icebreakers that some of my closest friends will say around me to a group of people that I don't know is, what's a conspiracy theory that you think there's some there? And so it tells you a lot about people very quickly as far as like the things that they might subscribe to. And honestly, there are certain things that, why would I engage around this thing? And when it comes to flat earth stuff, one, it's not my area. I work with people who it is their area, but like, it's not my area. So I don't tend to engage, because I try to also practice what I preach, which is like, I don't want to be speaking out of my own lane of expertise. But two, it doesn't work very well to convert people. I think anybody that's probably done mission work can tell you that it doesn't work very well. And so I think for me, when I come across that kind of stuff in the wild, I don't try to convert people. I will ask them questions though, in good faith. I don't want to be, just asking questions to try to prove a point. I genuinely want to know more. Tell me more about why you believe what you believe. And I think that kind of brings us back to, how this conversation started. I'm really curious as to the why behind things, because I think those kinds of beliefs are often load bearing for people. And it's very easy to dismiss people as crazy or stupid. And I don't want to do that. I'm actually just way more curious about what load is that bearing for them and why. And often, one of the things that you'll find is that it serves a purpose, and oftentimes it's community. And so it's one of those things of like, I'm not going to talk somebody out of community that I just met 5 minutes ago. Like, I'm not going to talk them out of that. And it's insane for me to think that I would. So I don't try to do that, but I am very interested in kind of the whys behind it. And I find that people also tend to respond differently too. If you're not a jerk, they don't tend to be a jerk to you. And so it's, I feel like you can have more fruitful conversations with people if you're actually you lead with curiosity, like, oh, that's interesting, because that's not how I live my life. So tell me more.
Yeah, that's interesting. I love how you approach that. And I've never been in a conversation yet with a flat earther. At least I don't think so. And I don't know that I would honestly approach it any differently because I'm not sure what I would say besides, like just every time you look at these videos from the space station. I mean, I guess they think they're all made up in a green screen or something. But every time you're like, they're taking videos from the space station and from the rockets, like you can see it's a globe. But I guess if they're convinced it's all green screen, I guess you can't go too far. But
Right.
well, are you okay if I read a few questions and comments from the group?
Yeah, please do.
And anyone that I read your stuff here. I know that sometimes people make comments about something that was said, but if it was said an hour ago, I might lose the context. So I'll try my best to get the context, and I'll read through some of these. But if any of them, if it looks like I'm moving past them and you wanted to jump in and make a comment, please just interrupt. But we'll go through here. Authoritarian barkings. Haha, that's exactly what it is, isn't it? Yep, absolutely. A lot of it is that. Mark, representing UK. Great to see you, Mark. Thanks so much for joining us. And everybody saying hi. Alex, hi. Looking forward to this one. Big fan of critical thinking. Thanks so much for being here, Alex. Critical thinking is the ultimate weapon against blinders. Yeah, for sure. Mark says, I should too. I've been big on the moral outrage, not so good on the critical thinking. I think trauma made my critical faculties go offline for a while. Yeah, agreed. I think that's a personality thing. Yeah, for a lot of us, our trauma definitely makes us focus on the wrong things sometimes. But yeah, it's good to kind of hit the reset button when we can. I would much prefer to have my kid in the hospital, but I understand why many women prefer home births. Yeah, and honestly, for our situation, the last 3 they were beautiful. Again, we did have midwife. We had midwives helpers, but much better. For ours, the hospital birth was the first one was an absolute nightmare. Mark says, I think I instinctively see through BS, but I'm not good at arguing the point with people. I think because Christianity still triggers me, so I'm not good at calm, rational argument. Yeah. I think
Same. I mean, everybody has their own trigger points, and so there are plenty of things that we could talk about that I'd probably just be incomprehensible with babbling about whatever.
I think what you said though a minute ago about the flat Earth thing, not trying to make comrades. I think sometimes you just have to admit that people don't see things the way we do, but sometimes you have to step back and say, you know what, I could try my best to convince you, but you know what, if you're really seeking the truth, maybe we'll come to the same conclusion anyway, but it'll take longer. I've told this story before, but 10 years before my deconversion, before I escaped Christianity, I had a childhood friend named Susan, and we had grown up together in the same Christian school. Our dads were both Christian school teachers in the same school. We had both memorized thousands of verses for Bible quizzing. We were both exemplary leaders. We were always getting the awards for being most involved in missions and ministry, everything. She was just the pinnacle Christian girl. And someone told me through the grapevine, did you hear what happened to Susan? I was like, no, what happened? Oh, she's an atheist. No way. I started this email chain with her, and sure enough, she's like, yeah, patriarchy this and mythology that. I'm like, oh my God, she went to a liberal feminist school. Now she's an atheist. What the hell just happened? Susan, my dear Susan, I wish we'd stayed in touch. I hadn't been in touch with her for 15 years since that point. I'm like, I can't believe that's happened to you. 10 years later, I pull up the same email chain. I'm like, hey, Susan, I hope this is still your email address, but just so you know, I'm an atheist now too, and I see it. Patriarchy, mythology, yes, bingo. 10 years later, I came to the exact same conclusion. Fortunately, I wasn't a jackass 10 years earlier to her and saying you're an idiot. I just said, we're going to have to agree to disagree. But the reality is, if you try to argue people into a corner, you're going to be tempted to be but you're a jerk or you're an idiot. It's well, you want to keep it so friendly that when if they do finally come to see it your way, or maybe you have to eat crow and go see it their way, that you still want to be able to be friends when it's all said and done. I think a lot of us are we're so used to that tribalism. If you don't agree with me, then we need to be enemies. It's sometimes, but not always, And it's
I think you're making such a great point about intellectual humility and the value of it, right? I think I also just kind of think that's why, if flat earthers come around, it's one of those things of no one wants to come across as a jerk, number one, right? We're in a polite society. We want to be nice to everybody. But two, if we're trying to actually engage in good faith, one of the main questions that we can ask each other is, how do you know what you know? Please tell me. Because I now will examine the same question about what I think I know. And the intellectual humility is really important about trying to be honest with ourselves about what we know, what we think we know, and what we don't know. Because we don't know everything. We really don't. And so it's important to base yourself a bit more in intellectual humility and really try to go back and really apprise, what do I know? What do I think I know? And what do I not know?
Well said. Well said. I love to the idea. I will admit there's a few things that I will be aggressive about, but I do think it's important to be nice. I will just say, for the sake of putting it out there, fuck MAGA. Everyone else, I'll be your friend. Jonathan, Mark Richter says hi. John, mate, great to see you. It gets so deep when people get indoctrinated. Critical thinking may be the first step, but it takes more to undo the traumas and BS still into us.
Yeah. Absolutely.
One of the things I was going to mention, I'd love your thoughts on it. It's interesting, as Christians, we have intellectually deconstructed and deconverted from the belief system, but the worldview itself, that's like the actual driver, that's on the subconscious level. In many ways, a lot of us are seeing that in terms of like the Carl Jung shadow work level, like that we're still Christians. We're not Christians, and that we would say it's all bullshit. But we're still thinking and processing like Christians. It's really fascinating how the roots just go so deep. And it's interesting, even just the idea of like, we're so focused on healing from religious trauma. And yet I think a lot of us are realizing we are trying to heal from Christianity in Christian ways. It's really weird. It's like, it's really hard to see yourself. I mean, it's introspection is just really hard, and shadow work is really hard.
It is. And also, I mean, stuff like that, right? The programming goes pretty deep, and you don't even realize how deep it goes until like you really start peeling back layers, and then that's uncomfortable. And, it truly is really hard work to do. And so it's fascinating that that's kind of the conclusion that you came to and a realization that you had, because that software is hard to uninstall.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. It's like, it's almost like we're so used to attacking the information, like this information is true or it's not. Where did it come from? And it's almost like you have to step back and say, don't look at the information. Look at your filter first, because your filter's messed up. Your filter's very filthy, and you don't even know. You've got maybe 10 filters, and half of them are filthy, and half of them you don't even know they're there. And it's like the information is going to have to come later. You just have to figure out your filter, and it's crazy how it works. It's quite a journey. It's like you're deconstructing Christianity, but you're really deconstructing human consciousness and your own past. But
absolutely,
anyway, we could spend a whole episode on that, I'm sure. Noelle says, if I lived any time before any type of modern medicine was developed, I would have died in childbirth. However, today I'm still alive and have 4 living children. Yeah, for all the questions I have about current medical stuff, I'm so glad that we live where, could you imagine if, we live where you get a toothache and a week later it's infected, a week later you're dead. It's crazy. My daughter and sister both needed to be resuscitated at birth because they were blue. So very grateful for the hospital. Yeah. There are crappy doctors and horrible hospitals out there that disrespect women's bodies and their vulnerabilities in the same ways that we have to do our due diligence and do our best to choose. Yeah, there's good and bad out there. We have to choose what is best for ourselves and our families. Yeah. Oh, acupuncture, that's demonic too. Yeah. For a lot of us in Christianity, any kind of acupuncture, or certainly yoga, was seen as demonic when I was growing up. Did you ever hear that? That it was like a demonic...
There's actually a fascinating book that I recently reviewed that came out, I think it was last month, called Beyond Wellness. And it kind of examines the religious roots of a lot of wellness practices. It's really fascinating. And as an atheist, I didn't feel like I was necessarily prepared to read it. And then I read it and I was just like, this book made me think really hard. It's really interesting. It makes some, I think, steelman arguments for a lot of religion, but it is fascinating how it goes through and it talks about how you can't actually divorce certain wellness practices from their religious underpinnings. You just can't. And yoga was one of them. And kind of like how different people over the centuries have viewed it as a result.
Yeah, it is crazy. It was definitely demonic in my world, for sure. It was for sure a no-no on the bad list. Mark says, I like Katie. She's smart and communicates well. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mark.
Thank you.
And
That you're being too kind, but thank you.
thank you, Mark. And it's similar. Once Steve Zakatis checking in here. Hey, friends, just popping in to say hi. I'll have to watch later. Katie rocks.
Hi, Steve.
I gotta say, Katie, too. I'm Dr. Katie, I'm a bit jealous that you get to see Bill Nye the Science Guy next week. I wish I had some. I wish I knew some people in high places, but very jealous.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. There's going to be some great people there, and I feel very lucky, and like I am pinching myself sometimes because I get to call some of these people friends, and it's great.
That's awesome. I've only had one specific person that was like a friend of a friend that I knew years ago. I worked for a bank, and I was working with this guy, and he ran the music studio in LA where like all these big names came. He's like, yeah, no, I was with Katy Perry last week, and yeah, Elton's coming next week. He's like, are you kidding me? He's like, no, like they're coming to my studio. I was like, you got to be kidding me. And he knew all these people. I was like, wow, that's crazy. He's like, no, these are like, I was just with Billy Joel last week. And I was like, I just can't believe it. But cool stuff. See here. Where did we leave off? Mark says, media false equivalency presents a platform for some real scoundrels and idiots. Yeah.
Here.
Yeah. For sure. That we could go on about that for sure. Let's see here. I love when Tim plays devil's advocate. I hope I don't play it too much, but yeah, it's good. It's good to do it a little bit. I was certainly left on Paxil for 14 years when I should have had support for autism instead, and this is because SSRI medications were being pushed by the pharmaceutical companies. I don't honestly. I apologize for my ignorance. I don't know what that means. Do you want to have any comments on that one?
SSRI, so serotonin reuptake inhibitors, it's a class of antidepressant drugs is what they're talking about. This, I obviously don't know the specifics here. It sounds like it was a real rough road, and I'm really sorry about that. It also sounds like potentially a misdiagnosis, which is also, leads to a really bad experience. And I'm really, really sorry about that. I hope that things have been course corrected for you. I really do. Otherwise, obviously I'm not going to speak to specifics here. I'm not a medical doctor. I just play one on TV sometimes.
Right. Interesting. Can you talk about GLPS? Do you have any thoughts on that?
On GLPs, I assume that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know specifically what we're trying to get at here, other than we're a little bit out over our skis on GLPs. They're very effective for certain things. And also there are some side effects that I think the area that we're kind of out over our skis in is there are some side effects that are they can be really rough to deal with, essentially. And so I think depending upon what you might be wanting it for, most people now are using it for weight loss purposes. The main issue is that you've got to stay on them. Otherwise you're going to gain weight back. And so they're not an end all be all for people. They can be a tool in the toolkit, but they're not kind of a magic pill that's going to kind of make everything better.
Can I ask a similar question? And this is just, if you can't respond to this, that's fine. I don't know if this is something we should get into, but I've seen a lot of people recently talking about ivermectin and what is it, mebendazole. Do you have anything that you can say about the fact that is being pushed pretty hard?
So ivermectin has become a virtue signal for certain parts of the internet and certain people. What's interesting about it is that I don't know why ivermectin in particular kind of became the rallying point. I really don't, because ivermectin does have specific clinical uses. It does, and it's really important for certain things. But now it's become almost a litmus test for if you're a true believer or not. And that's kind of, for me, insanity. This is probably one of those things that I'm probably just going to babble about incoherently because I just kind of go apoplectic about it. But I think what's really fascinating about it is they're sort of setting themselves up to never claim failure, because if we're ever in an instance where something happens and there's a big outbreak of a fungal infection or, worms, whatever, that ivermectin would actually be useful for, we're going to get so many people being like, I told you so, and forgetting about all of the times that they said ivermectin was going to work. Right? They're going to reverse engineer it to be like, I told you so. And it's going to be one of those things where it's like a broken clock can be right twice a day. That doesn't mean that it's actually a functioning piece of equipment. And it's amazing because it's really similar to, if you, and I don't necessarily want to open up that can of worms, but thinking about like psychics and focusing on the hits and never thinking about the misses. Right. And so it's been really interesting watching kind of the ivermectin stuff, because it is no longer about what it's clinically actually used for, and is now just a litmus test for if you're a true believer or not. And if you're a true believer, you're one of us. So you can you can sit with us at lunch. But if you're not, you can't sit here. It's fascinating.
Yeah. Well, just make sure everybody that's trying to get their medicine, make sure you clear it with Dr. Trump first. We'll make sure it's all correct. Ugh. It's crazy that he's been involved in these discussions. I can't. It was disgusting with COVID. Like, maybe you need to put bleach in your veins. Like, what the fuck is wrong with you people?
Sunlight directly into your veins.
Yeah, like, it's crazy. I know some people that literally drink like a watered down bleach. Have you seen that?
Are you talking about Miracle Mineral Solution? I
think so. Yeah, where it's like a watered down bleach, right?
Mm-hmm. And it's got a very strong foothold in some very religious communities.
Yeah.
Yep. It's also, there are a lot of news stories about people being killed from drinking MMS.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not good.
Nuts. Mark says massive amounts of money being made by big pharmaceutical companies. Yeah, I think that's what I was getting at before. Is that there's for us to trust. For me to trust, vaccine companies, I would want to know where the money is, and I don't think there's any way to know it, which makes it to me just makes it a big question mark as to whether or not it's really something we should be taking. I just don't know, because I don't know. There's no way for me to know where the money is. I'll never know that. I'll never know the discussions behind closed doors. And that's where I hate that we live in a world where you feel like you can't trust the experts because you don't know that they're really experts. You think that they might be experts, but they might have been trained by people who aren't experts, who are trying to pass a certain ideology, or they might be paid off by someone with an ideology. It's just, I know we already talked about that, so I'm not trying to beat a dead horse, but I hate that it's like, you don't know who to trust anymore. You just don't. Do you have anything you wanted to add to that, or?
I think pharmaceutical companies are a really fascinating area for me, because I never want to find myself in a position where I'm defending them, because I get very frustrated with them. But also, there are some things that I think have been objectively really, really good that have come out of pharmaceutical companies. There have also been some things that have been objectively really, really, really bad. And so it's fascinating because I worked internationally, and I've worked with people who worked for the WHO, and I kind of got a little bit of a backstage pass to kind of see a little bit more about how some of that money flows for vaccines in particular. And like, the money is not in vaccines. The money is in stuff like GLPs, in stuff that so especially for pharmaceutical companies around vaccines, there's something that's basically akin to, like, if it's a public good, then there are certain rules around what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. And so they don't make very much money. They usually lose money on vaccine and vaccine development, which is also why we don't see very many new vaccines even coming out. I know that, right, the COVID vaccine, right? But otherwise, there isn't a ton of money in vaccine development. Now, a lot of vaccine research happens at universities, that isn't necessarily going to be funded by pharmaceutical companies. Now, sometimes it will be, but oftentimes that's not where they're going to put their money because it's not going to make them very much money at the end of the day. So it's interesting just because like the little that I know about it, how the money flows, they're not making money on those vaccines. They're making money on different kinds of drugs and supplements.
Gotcha. Interesting. Well, thank you very much for your thoughts on that. By the way, I'm going to probably move a little faster. Dr. Katie was willing to come on, but we did time it where it's later for me, but it's actually about probably your dinner time. So I'm keeping her from her family. So we'll wrap this up soon, but we'll read a few more real quick and then go. Katie and Tim are busy talking and I'm listening, but does anyone know what the pros and cons of raw milk are? That one's super confusing. Do you have any thoughts on that? There's a similar comment here. Raw milk can be safe for a lifetime, but there's a statistical risk for bacterial infections. I don't know the specifics.
Yep. Yeah. It's the raw milk thing has also become kind of a flashpoint. And it's been interesting to kind of see how that's, I guess, come about. And it's one of those things where, I work in public health. The thing that I think about is big numbers. And I think about people en masse. And I think raw milk en masse is bad because we are talking about much higher risk for bacterial infections. We're also talking about tuberculosis. We're talking about a bunch of bad pathogens. And so it's one of those things where when we're thinking about how systems work, and we're talking about our food system, raw milk, if you've been drinking it your whole life and you've never had a problem, like that's great. But also you're one person. And if we scale that out to 333 million people in this country, we're going to have a real bad time. And so it's one of those things of like the numbers game. And there's, and if we're having a conversation about kind of the fundamentals of public health are about prevention, and especially I spend a lot of time thinking about how to prevent healthcare costs. And so one of the things that we can do to prevent people from having to go into the hospital because they were, sickened by listeria or whatever it might be, is pasteurization. And so it's one of those things where for me, because I do deal in kind of big numbers and thinking about larger chunks of people, and sort of how those systems work, for me, it's kind of a no-brainer because I don't, if we can prevent people from getting ill, we should probably do that. So as a policy, that's kind of where I fall on it. And how I think about raw milk too. And pasteurization is also a fairly low cost prevention technique.
Yeah. It's funny, just a quick side note. My kids love raw milk, but I'm lactose intolerant, and especially raw milk. I can literally drink a drop of it and I will be paying for it for 3 days. I can't touch raw milk. I mean, I can barely touch regular milk, but interesting. Can I ask, you mentioned something that I think is important to bring up here real quick. The idea of bringing it bigger numbers. Mm-hmm. When you look at vaccines, somebody might get a vaccine individually. They're fine. They're fine. You mm-hmm. go en masse, you mm-hmm. have children that literally get a vaccine and they're dead the next day. And I've seen enough cases where I don't think that's an exaggeration. There are a lot of cases. Vaccines do hurt children, and the vaccine courts do not allow people to sue pharmaceutical companies for the damage that it does to children. And that itself is a disgrace that you can't sue a vaccine company when your child dies from a vaccine. But when you look at vaccines, you scale it up. You're not just looking at tuberculosis or infections. You're looking at a lot of children being dead or being directly severely damaged by vaccines by the thousands. I mean, how do you process that scale up concept when vaccines hurt so many kids?
So this is going to be one of those areas that I think we're probably going to disagree on the premise, because the studies that I've read and the people that I know that actually work in this area, it's not thousands of people. And we're not talking about children dying overnight. And we're not talking about thousands of kids either. I don't wish to downplay that vaccines can have unanticipated side effects. They can. They absolutely can, and they do. So I'm not going to sit here and deny that. The difference, though, is one, I think you might be a little misled on kind of the numbers that we're talking about. And two, one of the ways that vaccine research works is you can't just look at the vaccine by itself in a vacuum. You also have to look at the condition that it's trying to prevent and how many people are suffering. Because with the COVID vaccine, for example, some of the same side effects of the COVID vaccine, so the heart stuff, right? That's also a symptom of COVID. How many more people died from COVID with that exact symptom from COVID versus how many people died from the vaccine with this one specific kind of thing? And those numbers can't even compare at that point. And so it's interesting because you do have to contextualize some of those numbers. And you also, again, I think have to question kind of where some of that information is coming from. There's a lot of misinformation about vaccines that's being spread, especially by RFK Jr.'s former pet, the Children's Health Defense. They spread so much misinformation about vaccines and about the kind of harm that vaccines have caused. Again, not saying that vaccines don't have side effects and don't have unintended consequences. They do. However, it is important to consider these things kind of in their proper context, which is, all right, maybe there were some cases of people being harmed by the COVID vaccine, but then also how many people have been harmed by COVID itself? And so it's not a one-to-one, because I think when people are talking to you about how vaccines are terrible and they're bad for people, the people that are talking like that often want you to forget about the stuff that happens when people get infected by these pathogens. It's been fascinating to kind of watch this play out, because now people are asking more of those questions because measles has been roaring back. And so now you're confronted with people kiddos in the hospital with measles, which is completely preventable. And now you're having people now finally have to answer for, like, tell me how this kiddo being in the hospital or dying from measles is better than them getting vaccinated. And now you're watching people kind of mentally contort themselves to be like, well, because like natural immunity is way better than a vaccine. But like, it's not. And it's not for the reason of you are running the risk of having to gain that natural immunity in the hospital. And if you look at those numbers of how many kiddos got the MMR vaccine and had to go to the hospital after they got the MMR vaccine versus how many kiddos got measles and had to go to the hospital, those numbers don't even compare. They just don't. And I think that context is often completely left out of those conversations.
Yeah. Well, I hear you. I think the hard part is that there are some stories where it is extreme. And I don't just mean like stuff you hear through the grapevine. Like I've known people where it's happened to them, and it's undeniable that it was the vaccine's fault. And I think like my kids are vaccinated, but I will admit at times I felt like I'm playing Russian roulette, and I hate that feeling, because I'm like, it's probably not going to affect my kids, probably not, but somebody out there is going to do this, and the next day their kid's going to have some trouble, and it just. I hate playing Russian roulette with my kids' health. I really do. I feel like it's a numbers game. It's probably safer for them to have it, probably much safer for them to have it. But I will admit it's not just like, it's not a clear-cut black and white issue.
I hear that. I really do. I think the Russian roulette framing is interesting because the vaccine, I feel like you're being forced to play Russian roulette and you're kind of framing it as though the vaccine is the main choice, but it's not, because the other choice is like, you're also playing Russian roulette if you don't get them vaccinated, because then, right. And so it's one of those things of like, you are being forced into this choice, and it isn't because you're being told like you have to get vaccinated just because. It's more, this pathogen exists, and this pathogen is forcing this kind of discussion right now. And I know that feels bad for everybody, and no one wants to feel like they're playing Russian roulette. But basically, the pathogen is there and is going to force that conversation no matter what. And so it's one of those like, well, no one wants to feel like they are putting their kids' health at risk. Obviously, no one does. What's interesting about the vaccine, though, is the vaccine is a tangible thing. that you can see. The infection itself is hypothetical, right? It exists in this space that's not tangible and that is much easier to kind of ignore until it's not. And and people are paying really steep prices for refusing to kind of engage with the hypothetical and not kind of dealing with what that looks like. And that's kind of why we're in this moment right now of like, we're going to lose our measles elimination status. And it sucks because I think the framing around it has been that like, well, vaccines are just terrible. And it's like, well, okay, again, not going to deny that there are vaccine side effects. There are, and also there actually are ways for people to receive compensation from when they believe they've been harmed by a vaccine. And it's actually way more straightforward than you would think. There are ways to do that. And the Trump administration has tried to make it even easier. And there are issues with some of that, but I won't go into that. It's a much bigger can of worms, but I think just that framing in the context is really important of like the pathogen is not going away. And so like the pathogen is the thing that's like forcing us to have this conversation. And I think then the decision then needs to be properly contextualized with like, well, we can't ignore the fact that the pathogen exists. So then where do we go from there?
Yeah. One thing I was thinking would be amazing is if AI and just the technology that's behind it all could get to a point where we could detect when someone is going to be harmed by a vaccine, where maybe we'd be like, yes, you all need to line up for this vaccine. It is going to help you. But real quick, before we give you that, we're going to test your blood. And 99% of you are going to be fine. And we're going to say, proceed to the vaccine. One of you is going to trigger an alarm. We're going to say, shit, we can't give you this. We have to change the vaccine for you specifically because of your blood, whatever. You have something different about you. And that way we could eventually eliminate even those issues. It'd be great if technology could do that. I know it's probably not going to be in my lifetime, but it'd be awesome if it could. And just be like, yeah, even the vaccine injuries that legitimately happen, we're going to shrink those to almost zero. And hopefully.
I would love that. I would absolutely love that. And I think we are moving in that direction, right? Like there are some people that we know shouldn't be vaccinated because they are allergic to something within the vaccine. And like that, we didn't even know about allergies until relatively recently in human history. And so like, it feels like we're moving at a glacial pace, but I do think that it's possible that at some point, far down the road, not in my lifetime, but like possible that like, yeah, maybe we get there and that would be great. I would love that. I would love that for everybody.
Yeah. We'll take away the Russian roulette feeling first. Let me read a few quick more comments. We probably won't spend too much time with this. Please tell my 12-year-old that she doesn't need protein powder.
Yeah, happy to tell your 12-year-old that.
Oh my goodness. Let's see here. Yeah, Jonathan says question everything. Absolutely. Yeah, and I feel like honestly too, like one of the things I don't want to be like controversialist, but you also have to we have to be skeptical. We have to be skeptical of the skeptics. We have to say who's guarding the guardians, who is watching the watchmen. And sometimes, the people in charge are wrong. It's just, it's hard. We live in such a weird spot where it's like, there's so much more information, but the barrage of information has made us more confused than ever. Mm-hmm. You'd think it'd be more clarity than ever, but it's like, it's the opposite. It's too much.
Nope. It's too much.
How do any of us know what is actually helping our children when they still get sick just as often as other kids? Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Jonathan, thank you so much for your support. Appreciate it so much. There's no baseline for our own research when it comes to our own children and our examinations. Yeah, no specific baselines, Jonathan says. It works different for everybody. You have to do your own research and go figure out what works and what does not. Truly, what is working healthy for one person may have the opposite effect on a different human being. What information can we trust? Excellent question. If I was a grown-up, fully vaxxed, but had nearly debilitating seasonal allergies, possibly life-threatening chronic asthma, would my childhood vaccines be saving me or killing me? Yeah, I think those are the questions we're asking. But again, interrupt if any of these you want to respond to real quick. See here. What information is being withheld from us purposefully? Yeah, that's the biggest question of all to me, because that was the biggest question of all regarding Christianity for me. I guess that's what our lives are all about now. Who can we really trust but ourselves and our own determination to seek out and find resources that make sense to us that don't gain monetarily. Yeah. Let's see here. I think a lot of this stuff we would probably be going on for another couple hours if we went through all these. So I'm going to just try to find a few quick highlights here. Mark says one thing that makes a good rule of thumb is to trust the scientific community. Most of them went into this to do good and have good quality information available. However, I wouldn't trust the Trump administration. Yep, not with a 10-foot pole. Absolutely. See here. Again, I'm sorry, everybody. I'm just going to slide through a few of these comments because we've kept Dr. Katie for a long time. I don't know if you want to address this or not. You can plead the fifth if you want to. Does Dr. Katie think the COVID vaccine should have been mandated?
It wasn't. This might be controversial. It wasn't necessarily mandated. It depends on kind of who you are and where you live. And so for some people, it was mandated. And so one of the things that I stood very firmly on was if you worked in a hospital, yes, you need to get it. And that truly was not controversial until COVID. And because if you have ever worked in a hospital, you have to be vaccinated for everything. I've worked in hospitals for a long time. And also, I feel like there are certain things where it's just, this was not controversial until people decided that it was. And so, especially for healthcare workers, it needed to be mandated. But, it wasn't mandated in other areas, but there were a lot of companies that decided that that's the direction that they were going to go. So then it almost becomes a different conversation about, if the federal government is doing it versus a private company, and kind of what the choices are there, because either way, you don't feel like you have a lot of choice, right? If like your company is telling you got to get it or you're losing your job, that's not a great choice. So I won't comment on it other than to say like it actually wasn't a controversial decision to require it for healthcare workers, because again, healthcare workers have to be vaccinated for everything. If you work in a hospital, you have to get a flu shot every year. And so like, it's just, you have to be updated on your vaccines, and that's the end of the story. Yeah,
exactly. Miss I says, hit the like button, folks. Thank you so much. Thank you for your support. Really appreciate that. My life was saved by surgeons and medicine more than once. Yeah, absolutely. I'd love more information about the upcoming event. You got this, Dr. Katie. Yep. There's a link beneath this video. Please check it out. It's really cool stuff. There's a lot of great people there. Anyone that's going to be near Buffalo, New York, I can't speak to whether or not there's tickets still available, but you could check. There might be tickets available. And so please do check it out if you can go. Do you know off the top of your head if there's going to be any replays or YouTube or anything from that?
I believe so. I believe there's going to be some recordings. I am not exactly sure of which ones, but I know that there are going to be some recordings. There is also a fairly well-known podcast within the skeptical movement called The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe. They will be recording a couple of episodes there. So I know those will be released. And then I believe there are going to be some videos that are made. So I think some of this you'll probably be able to see online.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'll definitely look that up. See here, the secular scriptures, it makes me so mad that ivermectin has gotten abused because my animals depend on it for deworming, and it's going to get regulated and make farming more expensive. Yeah. Let's see here. What are the, Ray, I'm not sure if I'm reading the right. What are the side effects of childhood vaccinations, and what could be done to improve the vaccinations to mitigate this? I think we touched on that. Do you have anything you wanted to add to what we already said?
No, I don't think so. I think we covered it pretty well for, the amount of time that we have and all of the things that we're trying to cover.
Yeah, exactly. Well, could I just ask you to wrap us up by maybe a parting shot? We're obviously all trying to do our best, and we're all looking at AI. We've been looking at Google, now we're looking at AI on steroids. There's a million different AIs now, and we're all just trying to figure out what to do. It's best for our bodies, best for our kids. And we're in some ways probably a little too confident that we know the right path forward. We should probably be a little bit more skeptical. What's a one final thing you'd say to people that are just like saying, you know what, I will admit it, I'm confused, and I will admit I don't know who to listen to, but Dr. So-and-so looks good. I mean, like the social media doctor, like Dr. So-and-so on social media looks good. Yeah. This group looks good, and I trust them. I think I trust them. I don't know. But at the same point, they're like, you know what? I also trusted my pastor, and he fucking lied to me for 20 years. I know enough to know that there's games being played, and I've been the sucker in the room too many times to count. Whether it's religion or medicine, what would you say to somebody that's just saying, I don't know, but I'm trying to be a better person and trying to be more intellectually honest about this stuff. What do you want to say to someone like that?
One, I think that's amazing. It's really hard to actually practice intellectual humility. It's really, 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 really hard. So anybody that's kind of experiencing this, one, bravo, because it's the first step and a really important step and a step that most people don't make it to. So like, good on you. But two, I think really asking kind of what the major unstated premises are and assumptions are of somebody, and trying to really figure out the answers to the questions of what do you know and how do you know it? What do you think you know? And what are the kind of question marks for you? And then what do you not know? And being honest with yourself about those things. And then also, I think trying to be aware of kind of how you are emotionally reacting to somebody or a piece of information, because that's one way to help gut check, that you are starting to be more aware of how you're thinking about things and being just kind of more aware of how you're reacting to things, because it's really easy to have a knee-jerk reaction to something. The harder thing is to then kind of stop yourself and say, why am I having this knee-jerk reaction? And try to walk yourself through the process of, okay, what is it about this that's kind of making me feel this way and why? And so really just trying to investigate, how you're thinking about things and why you're thinking of those things.
Good stuff. And I can't help but think immediately, all those things, I know you're probably saying them more in the medical context, but man, if we'd asked those questions about religion.
I mean it about everything. It's right. Like that happens to be the sector that I work in, but like, I mean it about everything, right? This applies to everything.
I mean, honestly, like just a simple question, like why are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John called Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and who really wrote them? And how do you know? And how do you know that's the original sort? Maybe there's an earlier version that's been highly edited, and those questions open up cans of worms that just go on and on. And man, oh man, it's amazing to think about. But I think it's been amazing to me to realize too that whether it's intentional or not, a lot of us have gone through seasons where we've had information that we would have, if we had it, it would have made a world of difference to us. And just to say, like, to truly be a, what's the word, a Renaissance person, Renaissance man, Renaissance woman, just being the kind of person that says, I want to be well-rounded enough to know enough about all these topics, but also I want to know enough to know when I'm being suckered and duped. And not to say that we can all be experts. I'm not saying everybody's going to become their own little, personal doctor. It's just that's a danger too. But just to say enough to know that there's usually more to the story. Especially when it comes to Christian claims, there's usually a ton more to the story. And I think we could argue that with a lot of medical things that we're seeing, there's more to it, and all we can do is our best. But at the end of the day, I think if we're willing to be skeptical, hopefully, and skeptical of the skeptics even, but skeptical of everything, question everything, hopefully we'll make good decisions. But yeah, it's a crazy world, isn't it? It's a crazy world that we live in.
It is. Well, intellectual humility is more important now than ever.
Yeah, hopefully there's some changes before our kids are in the stage we're at, because man, oh man, I kind of shudder to think about some of the weirdness that could happen. But I digress. We could talk about that for a while too. But I'll just wrap up by saying again, we've been speaking with Dr. Katie Suleta. Dr. Katie, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and your story, your insights. Thank you for entertaining some of my devil's advocate stuff. And also, I do wish you well with your speaking at the Committee for Skeptical. I'm sorry, it's CSICon. For anyone that joined us late, SciCon, it's the conference for the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. The link's beneath this video if you want to check out what the great work they're doing. Wish I could be there, but maybe one of these years I'll make it. But thank you so much. Really great to meet you. Hopefully we can chat again sometime, and appreciate all you do. But thanks again. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. Have a great night, everybody. Bye-bye.